and protect your data. And we'll have time for some questions at the end, so feel free to think of anything you've got in the back of your mind that you want answered, and we'll take it from there. Okay. Just a quick overview. This is, again, Maureen James speaking. My co-owner, Roger Hayashi, and I own Summit Compliance Group. We both have been in the industry for about 30 years in insurance and investment advisor and securities compliance. The last 15 or so working exclusively with distribution. Will Lynch here. Will, you want to give your own little bio?
Sure. I'm the founder and CEO of a cybersecurity firm in New Jersey, and what we do is we provide various patented and unique cybersecurity solutions, not only to corporate enterprise, but all the way down to the small to mid-sized business, as well as to individual consumers.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And in case you didn't get enough of us, here's just a quick overview of what Summit Compliance provides. So pretty much anything compliance related. If you've got an issue, we've probably handled it or tackled it. Well.
And we provide primarily two technologies to the corporate enterprise, small, mid-sized business space, generation protection for end users, networks, endpoints, using threat intelligence, and then obviously the mobile device security we're going to touch upon as well.
Okay. All right, so we'll get to it. We know you guys have a lot on your plate, and we appreciate you joining us today, so we won't waste a whole lot of time. Of course, what is a presentation without a disclosure up front? And bottom line is basically, we're not lawyers, we're not attorneys. We'll do everything we can to help you guys, but you know, if you get into a pickle, you may need some legal advice. Okay, so today we're going to talk about, first of all, the importance of cybersecurity, why it's becoming such a big deal these days, why you're hearing about it, what's going on at the regulatory level, and how that will impact you as a distribution partner, what you may need to do to protect yourself and your client data. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges you're going to face or are facing as you do that, and then end on a good note with some solutions you can do to help meet all the requirements and hopefully keep the regulators off your back. And again, we'll take time for questions as well. So without any further ado, all the formal stuff is over, and let's get into the meat of it. Okay, and again, it is growing every day. It's probably not any surprise to you that cybersecurity issues and breaches are becoming more and more common. There are more people who are spending their daytime hours just trying to find ways to hack information. And know there was an article yesterday that I believe Redtail just got hacked recently as well. So it's, and Will's going to go over some more examples of just how commonplace this is. Hop right to it.
Thank you. Thank you. So obviously, there may be some of you on the call today that are more on the corporate level that are representing some carriers, some IMOs, maybe some brokerage firms, MGAs and GAs. And, you know, when you're dealing with the larger corporations, they certainly face their own challenges. Obviously, to Maureen's point, we've got compliance and regulation issues, you know, especially issues with if that enterprise allows employees to access the corporate networks or servers remotely. So there's a remote access authentication challenge, and especially with, you know, all of us are very impatient, and we want this convenience and expediency of getting access to our data. So a lot of companies have allowed for bring your own device policy to be put in place, but that all represents some very large challenges. Risk mitigation strategies are needed by those carriers and IMOs. And if you're not aware, obviously in this industry with insurance, the HIPAA fines and settlements can be astronomical, but the average cost is in excess of $3 million. And it can be greater than that, obviously, when you factor in all the things that are listed on the screen between fines and penalties and reputational risk as well. Next slide, please. Now, the smaller businesses, and I'm going to put most of you who are on the call today into this category. You know, if you're an independent agent or advisor, you're definitely a small business, right? So, you know, if you're not aware that actually globally, close to 60% of all cyber attacks are going after people just like you and me. It's not just the big corporations that they're going after. And the reason why is that the cyber criminals realize that, you know, for most of us, we have maybe limited IT support. or we have limited resources where we're not able to put into the intrusion detection and intrusion protection systems that a larger company might have. Now, especially with the type of data that we collect, right? We collect a lot of personal identifiable information, and obviously that is very valuable on the black market. But the average cost is still pretty stifling. So a small business that's experiencing a data breach, the average cost is approximately close to $700,000. And, you know, the percentage of businesses in the small business space, they can't sustain that. And many of them are, in fact, out of business within 6 months after they've experienced a data breach. Next slide. Some interesting stats here. Obviously, as Maureen mentioned, you can't go practically a day without hearing another company or business being breached. Back in 2017, we've got the famous one with Equifax, where almost half the U.S. population's PII was jeopardized. In 2018, we heard about the Marriott hotel breach, where 500 million global travelers' information was in jeopardy, including their passport information. And we probably are very familiar in the fact that we all hear about phishing email scams, C-level impersonations. They're up significantly over the last couple of years as well. Next slide, please. Now, as these companies continue to load on the slide, these are all companies that have experienced data breaches in recent years. Some pretty big name companies. You've got JP Morgan Chase, you've got Anthem, Home Depot, Target, etc. Now, they all have a commonality. The commonality is that they have all experienced a data breach, and all those data breaches were caused by a malware virus known as a keylogger. Next slide, please. Now, according to IBM, they came out with a white paper, and they're talking about advanced persistent threats. These are massively distributed malware viruses. They are intended, they're created and intended to evade corporate intrusion detection systems, corporate intrusion protection systems, and obviously antivirus and anti-malware. Malware itself, keyloggers themselves are able to bypass all of those technologies because that's the way they're built. And the reason is they can only stop what they know about. And the problem is, as we'll talk about in a moment, is that they just don't know about most of them. But it is interesting that these advanced persistent threats contain two primary components. I mentioned it already, a keylogger, and the second one is a screen scraper or screen capturing. Next slide, please. So not only is your data at risk, but your client's data is at risk. They're confidential, medical and financial information. The biggest threat to you and I is a keylogger. You know, and what a keylogger is, as I mentioned, it's already a malware virus, but cyber criminals use this with malicious intent to steal every keystroke that you type on your computer, your laptop, or your mobile device. So think about that. It can steal your login credentials, passwords, social security numbers, dates of birth, account numbers. Everything that you type on your device can be stolen by the way of a keylogger. And as I just mentioned in the previous slide, it cannot be stopped by antivirus and anti-malware software. So we have this false sense of security that we're safe when we're at home or when we're at the office and we're working or shopping online or whatever it is that we're doing. We feel safe because we've got antivirus software, and the reality is that does nothing because it's a reactive, passive solution. So there are over 1 million new strains of malware viruses released to the marketplace every single day. In 2017, there were close to 450 million strains released, and yet as a whole, the entire industry of antivirus, the Nortons, the McAfees, et cetera, they had only identified 25 million of the close to 450 million that were released. And as I said, they can't stop what they don't know about, and they didn't even know about close to 400 million of those viruses that were malware that was released. Now, obviously, there are many different types of data breaches that can occur. You could be traveling on a business and you could lose your laptop. A secretary could be sending out an email with a spreadsheet attached, which has customer or policy owner information in it. That obviously can cause a breach. But 75% of all hacker-related data breaches were caused by malware. And the scary stat here is 85% of those contained a keylogger component. Keyloggers are the #1 tool used by cyber criminals and hackers. Next slide, please. So what if your business had a data breach? Could you survive? I don't know. That's what we're hopefully never going to find out. But the reality is, even with the standards and practices that are being put out there right now, even with the rules and regulations being put out there, you have to take this very seriously for yourself and your business. Next slide.
Okay. So
Over to you,
that
Maureen.
was the fun stuff there. And, you know, speaking to what Will just said here, if you think about, you know, can your business survive? I mean, that's a crucial question, because you think about even the, you know, the Target breach, where when they lost data, they lost clients' name, address information, credit card information. The data that you guys have as insurance producers is much beyond that. You have clients, you know, social security numbers, you have their medical history. There's so much more data that you have, so it's that much more important to protect it, which is why we're seeing the regulators step up and really prescribe more stringent requirements on the industry. So it's probably, you know, no surprise that the NAIC has gotten involved. Now, the NAIC, as you know, is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and they're not a regulatory body, but they do create model laws that they send to the states in the hopes that the states will adopt them. And the goal is to have consistent laws so that we don't have 50 state laws that vary significantly from one to the other. It's probably no shock that, you know, with the NAIC proposing model regs, New York came out first. They had a law before the NAIC's model was even done. Now, obviously, right now, 4 states have actually adopted the model law after New York's law was introduced. 13 more states are currently introducing bills that have the words insurance, insurers, cybersecurity, and data security in them. So this is being addressed, and it's starting to spread, frankly, like wildfire. And in fact, the U.S. Department of Treasury has actually come out and recommended that the states adopt the model law, the NAIC model law, within 5 years, or federal preemption may occur, which means the feds may step in if the states don't act quickly enough. And you can see a quote from Linda Lacewell here from the New York Department of Financial Services, that she sees this being the #1 threat facing all industries globally this year. So it's not something that's going away. It's one of the few items and the few issues that goes through legislation with bipartisan support. There's not folks coming up and saying, you know, I oppose this, I don't think we need to do it. I mean, you think back to SEC Rule 151A or the DOL fiduciary rule, or even the suitability rule. There was lobbying for and against it between the two parties. This one has full support from you know, both the Democrats and Republicans. So it's not something that's being contested. So it's frankly just a matter of time before it comes to the rest of the states. How's that for a scare tactic, huh? So just a quick map of where we stand right now. New York, you can see in the red, they've got their own rule. The dark blue states there show those states who adopted the NAIC version of the law. The yellow version, the yellow states are versions of the NAIC model law, but they have they're currently pending it and pushing it through, so it has not quite been adopted yet. And the pink states, or kind of coral looking states, appear to be that they have rules in the making, probably similar to the model reg, but they haven't published them yet. Now, if your state isn't showing up here and it isn't affected yet, it is pretty likely that it will be soon. You know, keep in mind, again, with the NAIC only introduced this in Q4 of 2017, and in 18 months, this is really incredible adoption by the states. Again, if you go back to suitability, that was adopted in 2010, and there are states that still have not passed that law. So this one, this one is just going through without a whole lot of pushback. So what does that mean for you in distribution? Well, it means a few things. First of all, you need to make sure you know what the rules are. You know, do they apply to you, yes or no? And if not, if the law is not actually implemented in your state, it doesn't mean that you're safe. There are still things you want to do to protect your data, even if it's not regulated by law. You know, a breach, as Will pointed out earlier, a breach can be really expensive and could be what we call a door closing event. It could put you out of business. So even if your state hasn't passed anything yet, you still want to pay attention to what's going on and what you need to do to protect yourself.
Maureen,
so
could I add one comment there?
Oh, sure.
You know, something that I hear frequently when I travel is that, you know, just to your point, I'm exempt, so why should I care? But yet I've actually have been in meetings with some of the largest insurance carriers who pay claims for cyber liability specifically. And they're telling me that even though the producer may have a cyber liability policy or E&O or privacy policies. They still, when they underwrite a claim, they still are looking to see if that producer or that business is applying even reasonably minimal standards to protect the data. So it doesn't even matter if they are exempt or not. They still have common sense things that they are being asked to look at.
And that's a great point. I mean, it's protecting data is a best practice, whether there's a law in place or not. It's and if you're not doing even a reasonable amount of work to keep your client data safe, you've potentially got an issue here. I don't know if I call it a sales practice issue. It's more of an operational issue that could affect your ability to maintain your appointments if you have a history of losing client data or having client data breached. So that's a really good point. So again, whether it's regulation or just a risk management tactic, there's things you need to know and you need to do to protect yourself. You know, unlike a large insurance carrier who has probably a significant staff on compliance and legal, you know, individual producers and distribution folks are really on your own as far as it comes to being liable. So you want to make sure you know the states that you do business in, what are the bare minimum requirements? Do you qualify for an exemption? So for those things that are prescribed by law, do you have to do them all? And even if you do meet one of the exemptions, are there still requirements that you need to worry about? Because being subject to an exemption does not mean that you're done, and it certainly doesn't mean that you're safe. For example, let's look at New York because they are, you know, obviously in the forefront of regulation. They passed a reg, and it had some transition phases. Those transitions were a couple of years in the making, but they've kind of come to the end of it. So the entire regulation became effective March of this year. Give you a quick example. Who has to comply? All resident and non-resident licensees. So that means producer, IMO, insurance carrier. It's individuals and entities. So there are exemptions whether it's resident or non-resident. There's differences in the requirements. But as far as an exemption goes, you know, what does that mean? Well, if you're exempt, there are still some things you have to do. For example, I'll outline the exemptions here real quickly. The exemptions are for New York. If you have fewer than 10 employees, including contractors, if you take in less than 5 million in gross annual revenue for each of the past 3 years, or if you have less than 10 million in year-end total assets, if you meet any one of those exemptions, you don't have to qualify for all the work for the full reg, but there are things you still have to do, and those things are on the screen here. So you still have things to do, even if you are a small shop. And not doing them is generally not recommended. You know, New York knows who's licensed in their state. So we've had clients actually have come to us and said, well, we got a letter from New York saying, have you complied? Why would they send me that? Well, because they know you have a license and know you haven't submitted the annual certification that you're required to submit. So it's not like we can stay under the radar. One thing, I probably skip ahead a little bit here. One thing to know is that if you're exempt, you still need to file an annual certification. And if in that exemption, you actually say, I'm exempt for this reason. The state still wants to hear from you. The things that you need to do here, and I'll go back because I probably should have not advanced so quickly here, is, you know, for example, have a program, the how, you know, you'll outline the how, the things that you're going to do, how you're going to limit access to data, you know, are you going to have a firewall, what antivirus you're going to use, your written policy will talk about the what, kind of, you know, when you're going to perform your risk assessment, what measures you're going to take to limit access, your user access privilege, perform risk assessments. I mean, there's a number of steps that you're going to want to pay attention to, even if you're subject to an exemption. Then we get to the challenges, because it's not easy. The first one is just, you know, obviously managing different state requirements. So if you're subject to different states, if you're on the New York, New Jersey line, or you know, you've got clients in Florida and California, you need to understand the differences in the requirements among the states. And in most cases, you're going to have to take the most conservative, you know, lowest common denominator approach. It's going to be hard to wall off your data and your processes for clients in one state versus another state. So being aware is the big part. And just keeping on top of what the evolving threat environment is. I mean, right now you probably are using cell phones, laptops, tablets, home computers. I mean, these are great tools. They're really good for streamlining and running a more efficient business. But the more we rely on these devices, the more systems we're going to access, you know, the greater opportunity then to have a breach, or for you to make a mistake. Maybe, you know, you send something to the wrong person, maybe you've got kids using your computer and their friends are using your computer and they're accessing information inadvertently. And cyber criminals, they continue to adapt as well. I mean, they're getting smarter. They pay attention to what software's virus protections are being put in place, and they're getting smarter. I mean, for example, I know 5 or 10 years ago, I don't know, I'd never heard of ransomware before, but the criminals are evolving. They're getting smarter and they're getting more creative. So then you got, obviously this is not a once and done. Continuing to use technology means being continually aware of and monitoring for breaches and malware and viruses and such not. And I can tell you, when I was with my last employer a few years ago, we did an annual assessment in compliance every year, and we went through what are our biggest risks as a company, and we would drill those down to now what of these risks would actually be a door closer? What would happen that would make us potentially lose business and shut our doors? And data security, cybersecurity came up at the top every time, whether it was because of reputational damage or just the sheer cost of addressing a breach. That was always part of our assessment. Like I said, cybersecurity was always right there at the top. So, I mean, it's important that you find the right solution for you, though. I mean, there is no really one cookie cutter approach. What works for someone may not work for somebody else. It's going to depend on the size of your business, the systems you use. And if you're a one-man office just running off a Google Drive, it'll be different than if you have 10 or 15 people. You've got your own server room. You're going to want to look at how many people you have in your office accessing certain systems. What are their user rights? Do you transmit data between systems? Is it encrypted? Are you using a keylogger? I would say that you really want to make sure that, for example, you're not buying a Bentley if a Toyota will do. At the same time, you don't want to be selling yourself short and going for the bare minimum lowest common denominator software or solutions if that's really not doing a whole lot to protect you. So obviously doing something is better than doing nothing. But again, the goal is to really customize and find something that works for you. So obviously, not being informed and doing nothing is not a defense. Kind of like anything, ignorance of the law is no excuse, and it won't get you out of any actions, especially if you do have a breach. If something happens to you and your data is stolen, there's a breach, and it looks like you've done nothing, you can't, explain you even had reasonable controls in place, you're not going to be in a very good position. Knowing what you have to do and taking steps to do something is better than doing nothing. And at the end of the day, when it comes down to a regulatory action, for example, if a state comes down to you and notices there was a breach or something happened, you need to be able, at a minimum, have a story to tell that, yes, I knew that there were concerns or I knew that there were risks. Here's what I did to appreciate and remedy those risks, and I'm still working on it. I'm not done yet. What the regulators want to see is that there is an awareness of the problem and that they're taking steps to improve. Understanding that nobody's going to be perfect. There's, as Will's mentioned, there's no way to really completely put up a 100% effective defense. But you need to be taking steps. You need to be working on it. There's things you can do that will deter and turn away some hackers. Again, nothing is bulletproof, but if you can, like I said, anything you do is better than doing nothing. So, again, understand the laws and find a specialist, like you do in any other area of your life. A generalist is, probably not going to give you the customized support that you need. So a little shameless plug here. This is Soma Compliance. We do have experts that do work with cybersecurity. We've got some CISOs, so Chief Information Security Officers, who have worked in the industry for decades that we employ to help our clients. We usually start with a free consultation with our clients. We'll run you through a series of questions to help you identify, what laws you're subject to. Are you subject to exemptions? If they apply, are there other things you need to do? Again, you can't be 100% safe, but you certainly can lessen your risks and have a better story to tell the regulators. So if you're uncertain, if you have questions about, what do I need to do, which of these laws apply to me, feel free to take advantage of that consultation. I know Will's got some pretty nifty solutions as well here.
So there are a whole slew of obviously managed service providers and cybersecurity firms out there, but you are looking for companies that would provide next generation protection using threat intelligence. It's more of an artificial intelligence. It's designed to protect you, the individual end user, as well as all endpoints. And an endpoint, so you know, is it could be a computer, it could be a laptop, it could be a mobile device. And obviously, working with firms that can provide you that technology. One of the things that we feel very strongly about is that even though the NAIC and NIST all talk about the technical term is data in transit or data at rest, that being that data is encrypted. But as we argue all the time with them, that the point of origin that data begins or is created begins where? It begins at the keyboard. So we are firm believers that even though NIST and the NAIC all talk about encrypting data, but at this time they're not talking about yet encryption of keyboards. So we feel very strongly that everyone should encrypt everything all the time. So if you're looking for some very cost-effective solutions to learn how to secure your devices, even if you're a one-man show or one-woman show, feel free to reach out to us so we can secure your devices. Oh, I'm sorry. One other thing I wanted to mention. So if you're sitting back saying that, I've had conversations with small business owners, you know what, it's never going to happen to me. No one is immune to being a target of a cyber criminal. And don't think that it's just one individual sitting behind a computer as a hacker. There are nation states who have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people working to create programs, malware viruses, and they don't just attack you specifically necessarily unless they're after a corporation for trade secrets. They're sending out these programs that are mass being sent out, and they usually have multiple vectors attached to them, which means that they're not just using one type of malware to get into your system. They're usually attacking a business or a company with 4, 5, and 6 different tools, and they're just looking for that one void or weak spot in your system or your devices in order to gain access. And even James Comey, former director of the FBI, came out a couple of years back and said it's not a matter of if, but when that we all experience a breach. And the FBI came out with another figure 2 years ago that says 90% of all mobile devices are already infected with malware. So you have to take this seriously. I'm done, Maureen, sorry. Off my soapbox.
That's kind of scary. Okay. Okay, so we've done scaring you, but hopefully at least giving you some information about, just how pervasive this problem is. And that, again, it's something that's not going away. It's only going to continue to gain more exposure, and the requirements are going to be more restrictive, or I'm sorry, more significant. So if anyone has any questions at this point, anyone have anything to ask? I know we're hitting right up against the half hour here, but if you have a minute or two, feel free to shout them out.
I'm going to try to just unmute everybody. Maureen, just advance to the next slide for me. So
There we go.